William Probasco comes to town, returns in 1857, purchases lots number 2 and number 3 from Andrew and James Fowler. So Andrew sells out, at the end of the Klein era, he sells out his buildings and lots to Probasco. Probasco operated the store during the Civil War years, so that would start about 1861. And we don't hear too much about that, and there aren't any write-ups about that, no stories about the old Probasco store in the Civil War. But if you look through the Banner and the Elkhart Review, some of those newspapers, and look at the ads, you'll be able to find the history of all kinds of stuff just by following the ads. We don't have sometimes legal documents to know exactly when a store started or when an owner of the merchandise started selling it, but we can follow the ads to see when they started appearing and when they went away. And you can learn a little bit about the character of these merchandise sellers by looking at their ads. We'll see that in a minute too. So during the Civil War, we'll say the mid-1850s, or the mid-1800s, which have been around 1850, the riverboat traffic was starting to wane. It was starting to go away because the railroads were inching closer and closer to Bristol from out east and out west. Not arrived here yet, not till I think, I don't know when, 1851 or something like that. Is that about right? 56, okay. So that put the kibosh on the riverboat traffic, and that pretty much stopped. It just wasn't affordable anymore. And behind the store on lot 2 and 3, there was a little strip of land, and then there was the river. And during the riverboat days, they had docks and wharves there that they could bring the boats and unload the merchandise and bring it into the store. That was kind of public land right there. But since the riverboat traffic had stopped, Probasco decided he was going to buy that little strip of land between the river and the store. And that's what he did here. This is his first ad right there. And I think this was in the Elkhart Review. It was from February of 1859. So that was before the Civil War, and when most of us were just babies. But you can get an idea of Probasco. This is a good-sized ad, you know. I mean, newspapers were, you know, they held a lot of ads in there, but you can read a little bit about that. And he says, west of Buffalo. Well, that's Buffalo, New York, and they're all from out east, and they're inching their way out this way. And he was a big guy. I've got some stories about him. The resources that I referenced for this little narrative here included a guy named H.S.K. Bartholomew. He was sort of a Elkhart County historian, president of the Elkhart County Historical Society, and wrote several books. They're available even now from Amazon or different bookstores that you can buy them at the library. He said about Probasco, his heart was big in proportion to his size, so it is not strange that he became everybody's friend and that the young people of the community looked up to him as a father. His son, Robert Probasco, said that he weighed 365 pounds, a pound for each day of the year, and a giant in strength. And he was estimated to be the largest man in Elkhart County and the strongest. There are some more stories that Robert tells here. But first I wanted to read something. I told you we didn't have any pictures of the inside of the store, but we have some text. And this was a really cool little poem that a lady wrote. Her name was Emma Bennett Kelly. I don't know who she was, if she was local or whatever, but she knew Probasco's store. Oh, by the way, that's Mr. Probasco there. He's sitting on a chair. This is 1875. This is the earliest picture of Bristol that I have in 1875. If you look at him, he's sitting on this little bitty chair and only half of his rear end's on the chair. If he leaned back, I'm afraid it would just break off that whole thing right back there. He was a big man, and you can see his mustache. We don't have too many pictures of him. This is probably the best picture that we have. It's in front of the store. We're looking west down Vistula this way, and right here goes Division Street. Okay, so he's kind of in front of the store right there. And this is another picture of the town. This is probably lots 4 and 5 or 5 and 6, something like that. And if you recognize this brick building on the right over here, that's a Redbird now. It was Hilbish's store back in those days. You've heard that name, Hilbish, a popular store. And then here was another one right here. And the reason I included this in, I just like old pictures for one, but if we zoom in on this little area right down here, here's our friend Mr. Probasco right there. It must have been taken on the same day, so that would have been 1875, probably by a professional photographer. Photography didn't come about for the masses affordably until about 1865, somewhere around the mid-1860s. So for pictures around towns and so forth, and this is a really nice picture, they probably hired that out to somebody and bought the pictures. But the store was an informal gathering place after hours for the men of the community, like a lot of places are. And we don't have any photos of the inside, but we have this poem I was telling you about. And this is a graphic that I found, since we don't have pictures. This is kind of how I would imagine them sitting around a wooden stove telling these stories. So this is this little poem about Probasco's grocery store. And you'll kind of get a feel of what it is inside by listening to these words. A circle gathered every night, say 20 out or more, around the big inviting stove in Probasco's grocery store. Nail kegs and cracker barrels took the place of fine settees, and there the circle spent its time in most luxurious ease. Here's where the farmers carried on. Here's where the hay was raised. Here's where the cords of wood were cut and where the stock was grazed. And where the monstrous clams were dug, instead of along the shore, great deeds were done around the stove in Probasco's grocery store. The women folk around the town allowed if these great affairs would only happen close to home, they'd all be millionaires. But while they're lugging up the coal or the wood from out of doors, these warriors were a-fightin' still in Probasco's grocery store. The nights they come, the nights they go, spring, summer, winter, fall, and still they meet there regular, the settlers, one and all. I'd tell you more of what they do and rake them fellows o'er, but I must go and take my seat in Probasco's grocery store. I just thought that was a really clever poem, and you get an idea of what was going on inside of the store. He was known affectionately, Probasco, as Old Pro or Uncle Pro, and his son Robert, someone had interviewed him, and without that we wouldn't have a lot of these stories. And he tells us some. One of the stories was told by a guy named George Adams, who was an early settler of Bristol, told the story to Robert Probasco. And he said, he told me once of seeing him watch 5 men who were struggling with an old-fashioned square piano, trying to carry it up the stairs with great difficulty, when Uncle Pro took it out of their hands and carried it up the flight of stairs alone and unaided. I do not vouch for this, as I certainly did not see it done, but George said it was a true story, and I have no reason to doubt that it was. So it wasn't a regular piano like we know a piano, but it was a smaller, and the stairways were narrow back in those days, so just to heft that thing up the stairs, get out of my way, guys, I'm coming through, and he did all that. He says, another time Probasco separated 2 townsmen before coming to blows. He told them to go back to their businesses. He also recalls, Robert does, looking up the river from the bridge, your eye followed the willows and the cedars and the locusts back of the old Probasco, Koss, and Hilbish stores to Warren's watering place. Maybe that was a tavern or a bar, I don't know. In the early days, the big west wing of this large store building on lot number 2 was a large warehouse on both the ground floor and the basement, which fronted on the river. There were wharves facing the wing of the store from which produce, wool, and immense quantities of apples were shipped downstream to St. Joseph, Michigan. From here, shipments were transferred to vessels that took them to Chicago markets. Mr. Probasco bought practically all local produce offered in any quantity in exchange for merchandise in his store. He handled wool in huge quantities, often having his entire warehouse filled to the ceiling with it. In apple season, he bought apples by the wagon load and packed them in barrels and shipped them. Some days, wagons would be waiting in line by the dozen to be unloaded out at his warehouse door. He continued this line of trading up to the time he retired from business. So you get an idea of the guy's personality. He was almost larger than life, and that's how you succeed in a small town with no riverboat traffic anymore, and he knew how to get it done. The banner tells of a few other events surrounding Probasco's ownership, and we learn a little bit more about him. There are more than what I have. I just picked out a couple. On July 7th, 1870, now, the Bristol Banner wrote, "Probasco has gone to the Cleveland water cure to sweat off superfluous flesh. Unfortunately, he was growing heavier by the year, and this was hoped to be a way to reduce his life-threatening weight." So those kinds of facilities must have been popular for people who were largely overweight. In 1872, 2 years later, a great deal of rowdyism is said to prevail in Bristol at present. As a consequence of the free sale of liquor licenses were a big deal back in those days, and the illness of the marshal. William Probasco has gone to the Cleveland water cure a second time, where it is hoped he will experience relief from the ills his flesh is heir to. So he's getting heavier. It didn't work the first time, and as we'll find out, it didn't work the second time either. He decided to retire in 1872, and he put an ad in the Banner announcing that fact, and this is the ad right here. Actually, this is from the Elkhart Review and not the Banner. The Banner didn't start until 1877, so this has to be from the Elkhart Review paper. And Robert Probasco tells a little bit about that. "We regret to learn that declining health has determined William Probasco of Bristol to retire from business. He's offering his large stock of goods at a greatly reduced price to close up the business at the shortest amount of time." So he was in very ill health, and he knew the end was near. And his son Robert said, "I well remember the printed posters placed on all fences for miles around announcing his retirement from the business in 1872. So Probasco had been living on the second floor. Well, if you include the basement, it would be the third floor, the top floor of the store. He'd been living up there, and that's where he actually died, up there too. Here's a 400-pound man who died upstairs, and they couldn't get him down. So they cut a hole in the floor up there and lowered him down and got him out, got his body out that way. So this is a story that apparently is written on the back of a picture or a photograph over at the museum, the Elkhart County Historical Society down the street here. But I've seen it in so many other places, so I don't think it's a rumor or a legend or anything like that. I think it's a true story. But we'll come back to that toward the end. In his obituary, the last paragraph said, "As a man, Mr. Probasco had the respect of all who knew him. In business, his integrity and honesty were above question. To him, his word was his bond. His maxim through life was industry and honesty. In family relations, he was kind, affectionate, and indulgent. In society, most agreeable and entertaining. In his friendship, strong and true. In his beliefs, liberal. In his charity, generous without ostentation. And in all things, his quality and characteristics were such that his loss will be deeply felt by his family, his friends, and by the whole community." That was what better could you say about a guy's life? And Bristol Banner, if you were here for Pinky Mosier's presentation of that, his great-grandfather, H.H. Moser, would have written that. And he was an awesome writer. The old Bristol Banner articles were just very well written if you get a chance to read those. I told you about the hole cut in the floor and the buildings. This is a drawing that is kind of a neat drawing. That's why I included it. I have a surveyor's drawing that isn't quite as nice. It's a little cleaner. But this actually includes an evolution of events. Like over on the left here, it says hay storage after 1925. And then there's some questions here. Probably built in 1846 by Solomon Fowler. So we have a little bit of a history of the building. Enclosed area. Was this enclosed by the Apps when the Apps owned the store? Here's a shed. Farm machinery was out here. And over here we have the main store over here on the right. And we can see how they put the porch in between 1878 and 82. Now we're on the upper floor, we'll say. Here, this says, if you zoom in on it, Probasco's cutout. That's what makes me think this is a real story. And, yeah, I heard it's still there. And in the back area, we'll talk about this in a little bit, but you can see a little bay window back here. That was the office of Herman App. But I did want to show you again. I mean, black and white pictures, you've seen this before. I like black and white pictures, and some of them I don't like being colorized. I just don't. But this one, I colorized it, and it looked pretty darn good. And I think it was worthy of it, because it just reveals a few things. It reveals the roads. You can easily see that they're all dirt, all the way looking west toward Elkhart right here. You can see him and his white outfit right there. And if we zoom in, it just shows him in the chair a little easier in this thing right here. So anyway, that is, I believe, that's the end of the story right there. If you have any questions. Thank you.